Hello. Are you guys
Yes.
properly? Hello. Okay, please turn off your mic. There is some disturbance. Please just fix your
Yes,
mics.
we
Okay, that's great. So today we are going to start our session and we are going to continue our lecture further. So as you guys remembered, yesterday we started doing tracks in detail, right? So we did dorsal column medial lemniscus system. Let me just give you a quick overview of that. We discussed that, for example, if this is our spinal cord, we have a beautiful butterfly gray matter. You guys know the concept. Gray matters are for the cell body, so they are going to have cell bodies. The posterior or the dorsal are going to be having cell bodies of the sensory neurons, while the anterior are going to be having motor neurons. So first of all, the pathway of DCML starts that new fasciculus gracilis or the neurons are going to come here. They're going to jump into posterior column, start moving upward, right? From the leg, they're going to be moving in a form of fasciculus, cylindrical form of fibers called as fasciculus gracilis, right? Okay. Then we discussed that the upper one are also going to be joining them, but laterally, right? So the lower sensation, the modern sensations as we discussed, okay, that's going to be your 2 point discrimination, proprioception, vibration, right? And the upper from the upper arm, they're going to be added laterally as we discussed. They're going to go into the nucleuses in the lower medulla, on the nucleus gracilis, fiber from the gracilis, and nucleus cuneatus from the fasciculus cuneatus. Then they're going to decussate. Then they will be start moving upward medially in the brainstem in the form of lemniscus. They're going to move into the VPL. From the VPL, we have internal capsule to the posterior limb. It's going to move to the somatosensory cortex. That's all right. So today we are going to discuss the pathway of pain and temperature. Yesterday we discussed we had two kind of sensation, the modern sensation and the primitive sensation. So yesterday I just told you that our ancestor used to have these primitive sensations in order to have better survival. And there your pain and temperature, right? So today we are going to discuss the pathway of pain and temperature, right? So let me again just draw these different columns of your spinal cord, right? Okay. So the pain and okay, let me just draw this entire column, the dorsal horn and the anterior horns. Okay, the dorsal horns, the anterior horns. Okay, just like that. Okay. So remember, the fibers of pain and temperature are first of all going to enter where you guys are going to be telling me the anterior horn or posterior horn, their sensory sensations. What do you guys think?
anterior.
Anterior,
Posterior.
posterior horn, because anterior have the neurons cell bodies which are motor in nature, which we'll be discussing in our descending track, right? So as the these nerves enter into the posterior horn, they are going to directly synapse on second order neuron. If you guys remember, yesterday we discussed that the first order neuron of DCML was really big. The axons were really big, and the synapse was basically seen here in the lower medulla to your nucleus cuneatus and nucleus gracilis, right? But in this case, as the nerves enter into the posterior horn, in the area of posterior horn, which is known as substantia gelatinosa. Okay, just give me a second. Here is Azan. Let's wait for it and then start our session. Okay. Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello, am I audible?
Hello?
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So
Yes,
these neurons
sir.
are going to these neurons are going to synapse here to the second order neuron. Keep that in mind. And these second order neuron are going to be present in specific area of your dorsal horn. And this specific area is called as substantia gelatinosa, right? Substantia gelatinosa. From there, the second order neuron is going to start. But remember, this second order neuron is going to move one or two segment above, just like that. Okay, just follow it. Okay, and it would just move through the anterior commissure here in the lateral portion of your spinal cord, right? In the lateral white matter, we discussed we have different columns of white matter. The dorsal one, which we covered yesterday, but here in this case, let me just revise it again. The neurons are going to synapse with the second order neuron, where in the posterior horn, if they are asking you which specific area of posterior horn, that's going to be substantia gelatinosa, right? And as they enter, they are going to move one or two segment above the spinal cord. That's really important because we are going to discuss it in pathology whenever we have hemisection of the spinal cord. So what are going to happen? It's really important to know each and every component of these checks, right? It's going to help you a lot. And a lot of students get confused in that. One to two segment above, passing through the anterior commissure. This is your anterior commissure. It also have a lot of significance because we are going to be having a pathology which we'll be discussing, that is syringomyelia. What is syringomyelia? The syrinx, we are going to be having a cystic dilatation of fluid-filled cavity, which is first of all going to invade the anterior commissure. And as it invades the anterior commissure, so which sensations are going to be lost? You guys are going to be telling me, yes. Which sensation? If anterior commissure is compromised?
Pain and
Hello.
temperature.
That's the upper motor
And,
neuron.
and temperature, but one to two segment below the spinal cord. Keep that in mind, right? It's really important. Okay, so as they move through the anterior commissure in the lateral column, they are going to then move upward, right? So that's why it's also got called as lateral spinothalamic tract. Lateral spinothalamic tract, right? So as they are moving upward, just keep one thing in mind. In the end, they have to enter into the relay station of all of your sensation, which is going to be your thalamus. So you guys can see here we have decussation actually, right? Decussation, but at the level of spinal cord. Does that make sense? What is decussation? Whenever the right-sided fibers are entering to opposite side, to the left side, that's basically called decussation, right? So decussation is seen in a lot of tracks which we'll be discussing, right? They are going to enter up into the thalamus. In the thalamus, which nucleus? VPL again. Is it clear? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. They are going to move to the VPL, and from the VPL again, they are going to move upward through the posterior, you know, limb of internal capsule into the somatosensory cortex, which we'll be discussing. What is somatosensory cortex? Where do we find somatosensory cortex, right? Okay, that's really important. Pain and temperature. We also have another sensation which is called as crude touch. Crude touch. Remember the crude touch, the pathway for the crude touch also, it moves through this anterior column. Keep that in mind, right? So the pathway is same. Again, it's going to decussate. It's going to move upward. And as they're moving upward, both of them are going to combine and make a single track, which is going to be also called as spinal lemniscus. Why do we call it lemniscus? Because they are going to be moving in the form of lemniscus, which we discussed. Is it clear? So this was basically the pathway of your pain and temperature. Is it clear? Yes or no? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the simpler pathway for your pain and temperature. Let's discuss pain and temperature in a little bit more detail, right? Remember, okay, yesterday we discussed about the receptors, right? What are receptors on transducer? They're going to pick the sensation, convert them into electrical energy. We discussed that, right? So the fibers which pick pain here, let's discuss that in details, right? So there can be two things which basically pick this pain: the free nerve ending, and the receptor of pain, right? The receptors of pain, they are going to pick these pathways, right? So basically there are two pathways for the pain to go. We have delta pathway and we have C fiber pathway, right? So we have A delta pathways or 8 delta, neurons, and basically we divide it into C fibers, 8 delta fibers, depending on the level of myelination. Depending on the level of myelination. What do I mean by the level of myelination, right? C fibers, both of them are going to pick this pain and temperature sensation, right? So the A delta are basically more myelinated. Keep that in mind. There is a lot of myelin sheath on it. And as we know, if they are more myelinated, it means we are going to be moving this pain sensation really fast in more myelinated pathway, right? Okay, the C fibers are going to be non-myelinated, right? Non-myelinated. So if they are non-myelinated, the C fibers, it means that the pain sensation through these fibers are going to move really slow. So it means that we have two types of pain, right? Depending on these fiber, two types of pain. One is the fast pain and the other is slow pain. So do you guys have any idea what is fast pain and what is slow pain?
Fast means the sharp pain, once you
Yeah,
hear anything,
sharp.
and slow is the dull pain.
Perfect. So fast pain is basically the sharp pain. It reaches to the brain in zero point 0.1 second, right? While the slow pain reaches to the brain in 1 to 2 hours. There's a lot of delay because they are moving through the C non-myelinated or unmyelinated C fibers, right? Okay. So as we know that the dull pain, for example, if someone is just having visceral pain mostly is going to be the dull pain, right? So there are going to be certain neurotransmitter at the level of these receptors. For example, the potassium, bradykinin, histamine, some acids, right? These are going to be the chemical irritants which can induce the pain signals, right? So keep that in mind. That's really important, right? So this was the entire pathway. Let me just give you an overview again, right? A simple overview of this pain pathway. So we discussed we have receptors that are free nerve endings, and we have other receptors, A delta fibers, C fibers, myelinated and unmyelinated fibers. They're going to pick pain. They're going to enter into the dorsal horn, where especially in the substantia genitalosa, where we are going to be having second order neuron. They are going to synapse on the second order neuron. From the second order neuron, they are going to move 1 or 2 segment above in the anterior commissure, moving in the lateral column, moving upward. It's going to be combined with the crude touch pathway, and then it's going to enter into the VPL of the thalamus. If you guys remember, thalamus is divided into three: anterior, medial, and lateral. The lateral was further divided into two: anterior and posterior. The anterior was further divided into three: the anterior, intermediate, and posterior. And the posterior was then divided into the medial and lateral. So here we have a nucleus VPL, ventro-posterolateral nucleus, if you guys remember. So from there, again, okay, VPL basically is going to be having third order neuron here, right? So the third order neuron from the VPL is going to enter through the posterior limb of your internal capsule, and then it's going to enter into the somatosensory cortex, where the pain and these temperature or these sensations are going to be picked by your brain, right? So this was all about your pain and temperature pathway. Is it clear? Hello? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes,
Okay,
doctor.
perfect. So the next thing which we are going to
Doctor, I have a
discuss.
question. The C fibers, do they have name? Because the A fibers are delta.
Okay, the C fibers basically do not have a proper name, right? They are C fibers, free nerve endings, you can say, because both of them are unmyelinated, right? So A delta fibers, the classification which is basically given. We are going to discuss classification here. It's a basic overview, right? Once we are just doing first aid, like once we just do this topic from here today, we are also going to read it from first aid, right? Okay. Then we have pain reduction pathway. Do you know what is pain reduction pathway inside your body? Let me just give you an example. We know
Yes,
that, for
gate
example,
theory of goddess.
sorry,
Also called as gate theory.
also gate theory.
Gate theory, yes.
Okay, we are going to discuss gate theory just in a bit. Okay, so we have this pain reduction pathway. What do we mean by pain reduction pathway? If you guys remember that, for example, if someone just go to the gym, right, and he's just picking a lot of dumbbells and everything, so at that time, once he's doing some rigorous exercises, he do not feel any pain, right? Once he just get into home, he suddenly started experiencing a lot of pain. It means that our body itself is having certain pathway of energies, right, which is going to reduce your pain. Like, for example, let me give you another example. Let's suppose if someone get into a fight and he's just hit by by his nose, you know So what happens at that time? He isn't aware of the pain. But once he just came home and he said, yeah, yes, I'm having a pain. My nose is broken, right? So it means that nature have also given us a pathway, which is basically an analgesia pathway, as an analgesia, which is going to reduce the pain. So let's discuss the pain path reduction pathway in a little bit detail, right? So let me just draw the brain. Okay, these are your cerebral hemispheres. Okay, your midbrain. Then you have your pons, your medulla, and down here you have your spinal cord, right? So remember, okay, here the thalamus is going to lie. Remember, inside our brain we have some hollow structures which are called as ventricles. We are going to discuss that in details, right? So basically, the lateral hemisphere of the hemisphere have hollow structures called as lateral ventricles. Lateral ventricles are going to join the third ventricle, which is present in the diencephalon, right? And then it's going to be a cerebral aqueduct, the fourth ventricle. We're going to discuss it in the CSF module in detail, right? So remember, here at the ventricular area, especially around the third ventricle and cerebral aqueduct, we have some gray matters deep inside, in close proximity with these ventricles. What do we call gray matters whenever they are present within the central nervous system? You guys are going to be telling me that.
Nucleus.
Nucleus.
Yes.
They are called as
Nuclei.
nuclei, right? So we have some deep
Yeah.
nuclei in peripheries of your ventricles. Along with that, we also have a big nuclei called as nucleus raphe,
Raphe nuclei.
or raphe, right? So what these nucleuses are going to do? These nucleus are basically they have a pathway of analgesia. The fibers are going to go down, right? And as they go down, we discuss in the substantia geniculosa, we have those second order neurons for the pain and temperature. So what they are going to do? They are going to release certain substances, for example, endorphin-like or enkephalin-like substances, and serotonin. Serotonin released by your nucleus raphe. Really important, one of your U-word MCQ, right? So serotonin is going to be released by your nucleus raphe. And what these neurotransmitters are going to do? They are basically going to block the transmission of these neuroreceptors in the pain pathway. So this was your entire pathway of your analgesia, right? Is it clear? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. So who
Yes,
is
sir.
going to be giving me an overview of pain and temperature pathway? It's really important. Then we are going to move forward. Yes, anyone? Hello? Hello?
Yes. I can give the
Yes,
overview to you.
please.
So it is the you have explained the spinothalamic pathway. Spinothalamic pathway is the sensory pathway, and it carries the pain and temperature sensations from our body, where the pre-nerve endings are present as well as the receptors of the pain are also present, and they carry the fibers from the pre-nerve endings. And because it is the sensory sensations, the sensations goes to the dorsal column in the dorsal ganglion, where you said a point substantia gelatinosa
Okay.
accept those all the fibers, and from the at the same level, the fibers don't accusate. The fibers accusate actually at the 2-3 levels above the spinal cord,
Okay.
and then they go to the anterior commissure. From anterior commissure, the pathway goes just laterally, and then they ascend up till the thalamus, because these are the sensory sensations, and all the sensory sensations relay in the thalamus. These are the second order neurons which are arising from the dorsal column, and the third order neurons arise from the thalamus. They relay in the ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus,
Okay,
and from
perfect.
there the third order neurons arises, and then they pass through the posterior limb of the internal capsule and reaches the sensory motor cortex in the brain.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, that's great. And what about the analgesia system?
Yes,
Analgesic
and the
system?
analgesia system is the pain reduction system. And as we know, our body has some analgesic effect. When we go the heavy exercises or the gym, our body release some encephalins and the serotonin and the endorphin like substances, and these substances are released from the periventricular nuclei. Periventricular nuclei are basically the gray matters and the fibers arising from those, and one is the largest nucleus, which is known as the Raphel nucleus, and the fibers are arising from those Raphel nucleus and all the other periventricular nuclei and the periaqueductal nuclei. They go down, and then they release these substances, and these substances basically block the pain and the thalamic sensation pathway.
Okay,
Pain and the temperature
that's
sensation.
perfect. So someone just asked me to explain gating theory, right? So what is gating theory? It's a really interesting theory, right? Okay, if you guys know that if sometimes if someone get injured, right? Let's suppose if they have injury of their let's suppose foot, hand, or anything. What do? We do some massaging, right? Right? And we know that the massaging can also reduce the pain. Have you ever experienced this mechanism? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Okay, if we have let's suppose if I hit my hand, so suddenly your mother would just come to me and my mother would just start rubbing that it's going to, oh, no, nothing happens. Okay, so basically it relieves pain, right? So initially the like basically the doctors were really confused that what may be the phenomena of massaging which is reducing the pain. So they think that there might be some gates which are going to be closed during massaging. And once the gate closed, now the transmission, the pain isn't moving upward. So they call it as gating theory. Is it clear? Let me just repeat it again. For example, if we have pain, let's suppose, so by massaging, the pain would improve. Initially, the doctors and the scientists were really confused that what's the phenomena? They didn't knew the phenomena, so they just assume, they just gave a theory. It's a theory, right? That there are some gates in the spinal cord, and once we are massaging, so that extra stimulus of massaging is going to close the gates, and as the gates are closed, now the impulses won't reach upward, and you won't perceive any pain sensation. Is it clear? But later on, it was found that inside the spinal cord, we have certain neurons called as connector neurons, right? Like for example, if this was your substantia genitalosa, first order neurons and the second order neuron, first order and the second order neuron, right? So in between them, they have some extra neurons which are called as connector neurons, right? Connector neuron. And as we are massaging during pain, so these connector neurons get stimulated, and stimulation of these connector neurons would release a neuroinhibitory substances, right? Neuroinhibitory substances. And those neuroinhibitory substances are going to inhibit the neurotransmitter coming from the first order to the second order neuron. So if I'm just inhibiting the neurotransmitter, can we perceive pain?
No.
We can't perceive pain. So this was basically your gating theory. Is it clear now? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's discuss our some other pathways, spinocerebellar pathways, right? Spinocerebellar pathway. What do we mean by spinocerebellar pathways? It means that these tracks or these pathways are going to be coming from the spine and entering into the cerebellum. And as we discussed, okay, so for example, if this is your brain, right? Okay, midbrain, pons, medulla, spinal cord. Here we have our cerebellum. Am I right? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we know that cerebellum is basically, as yesterday I just discussed that above the level of the brain stem, all of the sensations are going to be a conscious sensation, right? They're going to be conscious sensation. And below the brain, the cerebrum, below any sensations coming there are going to be subconscious, right? Subconscious. Like for example, we know that the breathing center lies here in the medullary portion. We know that most of the regulatory pathways lie before, they do not enter into the brain, but they lies in the subconscious brain, right? Which is going to be your pons, medulla, cerebellum, right? So it means that the sensations which are unconscious or subconscious, we don't actually have to think about that. Like we don't think of breathing, right? It happens, right? It's a subconscious activities, right? Okay. So the spinocerebellar pathway are going to enter from the spine into the cerebellum. Okay. And a really important feature about spinocerebellar pathway are that they are going to enter ipsilaterally into the spinal cord. What do we mean by that? That the sensations which are coming from the right side are going to enter into the right side cerebellar hemisphere, and from the left side are going to enter into the left side cerebellar hemisphere, right? So what are the sensations which are basically coming into your cerebellum? Who is going to be telling me that? Yes. Hello.
Sensation of balance.
Okay, sensation of balance. And for the balance, we need to know different location of your body part. Am I right? In order to have a proper balance, I need to know that where my right hand is, where my left hand is. So can I say that the position of locomotive system is going to enter into cerebellum? As you guys know, that whenever we have cerebellar problem or lesion, we will be discussing what's going to be the first test which we are going to be doing, that is finger to nose test, right?
Yes.
Hello? So in finger to nose test, an individual cannot just, bring his finger towards his nose. Why? Because as the cerebellum is damaged, individual won't be having any idea where my organs, where my different, where my hand is lying, where my fingers are lying, where my nose is lying. So that's going to be the lesion. It means that the information of position of different body parts are going to be entering into the cerebellum, which is going to help us balance the activity. Am I right or no?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So as we have, like cerebellar damage, so in the finger to nose test, an individual cannot bring his finger towards the nose because he do not have any sense where my nose is, where my finger is, right? Similarly, we are also going to be saving something called a Romberg sign, right? So proprioception, basically. What is Romberg sign? And if an individual close his eyes, as he do not have any sense of his body parts, he will just start falling, right? By closure of eyes, which is known as Romberg sign, which we'll be discussing. It's a test of proprioception, right? So all of the locomotive, okay, all of the proprioception, the sense of, the sense of where different organ lies basically comes into your cerebellum, right? That's the function of cerebellum. What else? Hello?
For balance.
This
Balance.
pterodactyls.
Okay. This diadochokinase, the alternating movement, right? That also require a high special level of, balance, right? So balance, tone as well, different tones of your, of your body parts are also going to be, responsible. The cerebellum is going to be responsible. So we are going to discuss descending pathway, that is motor pathway. And there we have the role of cerebellum, which I'll be discussing. Keep that in mind, right? So this is going to be really important point to keep in mind because I'll be discussing it right after this topic. That cerebellum, okay, let me just write it down really simply. Cerebellum basically is having sense of where our body parts are lying. Okay, it always have the sense of where our body parts are lying, or proprioception. Okay, so we have spinocerebellar pathway. For example, if this is your spinal cord, right? Again, you have your anterior horns, your posterior horns, right? Okay, so in the lateral column, basically these spinocerebellar pathways are going to be lying, right? So we have two spinocerebellar pathway, which is really important. You have to keep in mind. That is the dorsal spinocerebellar and the anterior spinocerebellar, right? Anterior spinocerebellar path. Is it clear? There, okay. So let's discuss the dorsal first. From the dorsal, the neurons are going to be moving upward, and they're going to enter into the cerebellum via inferior peduncle. So what is peduncle? Let me just mark it here, right? So your midbrain basically is also connected with your cerebellum, via some fibers, which is basically called as peduncles. So peduncles are basically connection of cerebellum with different parts of your brainstem. So the midbrain basically is connected with your cerebellum with which peduncle? The superior peduncle. Okay. Hello. The pons is basically connected with your cerebellum with which peduncle? Yes. Anyone?
Middle cerebral peduncle.
Yes, middle cerebellum peduncle. And the medulla is connected with your cerebellum via inferior cerebellar peduncle. Is it clear? Okay. So these pathways from the dorsal are going to enter into the brain stem, and via inferior peduncle, they're going to enter into the cerebellum. We are going to discuss cerebellum in details, different hemispheres, what are the function, the homunculus and everything. But till now, you should know that the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway just move upward. it moves into the cerebellum via inferior peduncle. Is it clear? Hello? What about the anterior pathway? So it's an ipsilateral, right? Hello? It's an ipsilateral communication of your spinal cord with your cerebellum, right? The right sided is going to enter into the right cerebral hemisphere. The left side is going to enter into the left cerebral hemisphere. Is it clear? Hello? Okay. Let's discuss about anterior peduncle. The anterior peduncle is a little bit, confusing. Not confusing, but if you just focus, so it's going to be really simple. The anterior cerebellar peduncle is first of all going to decussate to the opposite. It's going to decussate to the opposite side of your spinal cord. Then it's going to start moving upward, and it's going to move upward just like that, and it's going to enter via superior peduncle into the cerebellum. So now you guys are going to be asking me that you just told me that all of the spinocerebellar pathway enters ipsilaterally, but here we have decussation, right? So what happens once it enter into superior peduncle? Again, it's going to take a U-turn, and it's going to enter into the opposite cerebellar hemisphere, right? So in the end, you can see the right sided are coming towards the right side. Why? Because we have two decussation, one at the level of spinal cord and other at the level of superior peduncle. Same is the case with the other side. Again, it's going to decussate. It would just start moving upward, right? And as it starts moving upward, it would enter into the superior peduncle, and again it's going to cross. It will just take a U-turn, and in the end, the innervation is going to be ipsilateral for spinocerebellar path. Is it clear? Hello.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
this was all about your spinocerebellar pathway. We have some other minor pathways, the rubrospinal pathway, the vestibulospinal pathway, which we'll be discussing in our brainstem, right? So let's discuss our really important and next
Dr.
part.
Ahmed,
Yes, please.
would you mind repeating the two levels of decussation, please?
Okay, no problem. Okay, this is your brain, your midbrain. Okay, pons and medulla, right? Then you have your spinal cord, right? We were discussing about spinocerebellar pathway. We discussed the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway that lies in the lateral column, but dorsally in the lateral column, right? It would directly enter via inferior peduncle into your cerebellum. That is simple, I guess, right? But the anterior one is going to decussate at the level of spinal cord. It would start moving upward, right, via the superior peduncle. Okay, here we have superior peduncle, right? Via superior peduncle, then again it would decussate and enter into the other side of your cerebellum. Is it clear? So we have two decussation, one at the level of your midbrain and other at the level of your spinal cord.
Yeah, thank you.
Is it clear?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, perfect. So these were all about the sensations for the spinothalamic, spinocerebellar pathway, the ascending pathways. These were all of the pathways which were ascending upward. Am I right? So what ascend upward? The sensation ascend upward in order to tell your brain what's going on, what's the sensation being felt by individual. It's going to be moving through the ascending pathway. Now we have descending pathway. Once these messages are perceived by your brain, as I discussed, your brain is going to compare it with the past experiences, and it's going to generate a motor response. And those motor response is going to come downward to your anterior, anterior what? Horn of the spinal cord, because here we have motor neurons, right? So let's discuss that pathway in a little bit detail. Is it clear? Hello?
Yes, it is.
Hello? Okay, perfect. So let me just draw your brain. It's really important picture, really conceptual, and really explanatory as well. So remember, the cerebrum or the cerebrum basically is having a sulcus, which is known as central sulcus. What is sulcus? Sulcus is simply, I would say a fissure. It's a sulcus, a central sulcus, a fissure kind of, the brain is basically made up of different sulci and gyri. Gyri are basically that, like this wavy kind of structures seen in brain, if you know, right? So they are gyri and we have sulci as well, right? So sulcus is basically a separation, or I would say a fissure present in the middle of your brain, which is known as central sulcus. Is it clear? Hello? Anterior to this sulcus, the area of the brain is pure motor in nature. All of the motor activities which we'll be discussing, which your brain have made, they're going to be decided in the anterior or anterior to the central sulcus, right? Then we have our dorsal, or before the central sulcus, we have an area for this that is called as somatosensory area. So the entire sensations, as we discussed, for example, we discussed the pain, temperature, proprioception, we discussed through internal capsule. They are going to enter into the somatosensory area. So it's going to be one of your new word MCQ. They're going to mark this area just before the central sulcus. They're going to be asking you, what's this area? So it's a somatosensory area. All of the sensation being brought by your ascending pathways are going to be perceived inside your brain, specifically where? In the somatosensory cortex. Is it clear? Yes or no? We have central sulcus.
Yeah.
Anterior to the central sulcus, we have motor area of the brain. Posterior to the central sulcus, we have somatosensory area, where all of the sensations are going to be perceived by your brain. Is it clear? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Now let's discuss the anterior motor response. Since we discussed the entire pathways of the sensations, everything in detail, let's discuss the motor, right? Once the brain decide what to do, how this motor response is going to be initiated. It's really important, really conceptual. Keep that in mind, right? So this anterior portion, in front of the central sulcus is basically going to be divided into three further areas. We have primary motor cortex, we have supplementary motor cortex, and we have premotor cortex. Premotor cortex. Is it clear? Three areas: primary motor cortex, supplementary motor cortex, and premotor cortex. Let's discuss what's the function of primary motor cortex, right? Okay, before discussing the function of primary motor cortex, you should know this concept of homunculus. Do you know what is homunculus?
Yes.
Okay. Homunculus is basically an imaginary picture drawn on the surface of your brain, which basically indicates that yes, this specific area is having this activity and everything. I'm going to discuss it in a bit, not now, right? So homunculus is only an imaginary surface or which we have drawn on the brain. Like for example, if I stimulate this part of the brain, so we just like scientists initially stimulates this part of the brain. How did they stimulate? By electrical, or any electrical, you can say catheter, right? So they just took an electrical catheter and they stimulate this portion. Let's suppose, and an individual was just, he just start kicking. So scientists assume that this specific area inside your brain is responsible for kicking. Is it clear? So they just draw an imaginary picture of foot, which indicates that this specific area is important for kicking. That's simple. Then they just electrically stimulated another area, and for example, an individual suddenly start shouting, right? So they assume that yes, this specific area is basically important for making noises, making voice. So they just draw an imaginary picture of mouth here, which indicates that this area is responsible for making voice. Is it clear? So how do we know different functions of different parts of your brain? By electrically stimulating them, or if we get a lesion there. So whenever individual had a lesion here, he stopped speaking. So we assume that yes, this area was responsible for speaking. Is it clear? Is this concept clear?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now you guys know how to look
Sorry,
for.
can you take it one last time, please?
Okay, perfect. So, for example, nowadays we know that we have a homunculus, right? Like for example, let me draw the entire homunculus here, right? Okay, just give me a second. For example, if this is your brain, your cerebrum, okay, so we know that this area is basically responsible for gait, for movement, for an individual to walk. We know that. It's here we have an area also responsible for urinary continence, right? Then as we are just moving like that, this area is basically responsible for hand movement, right? We know that. Nowadays we know that, right? and this area is basically responsible for the facial muscle movement, and this area is basically responsible for speaking, right? So this is an imaginary picture which I have drawn, and I know that each and every individual brain, this specific area is responsible for walking, for urinary continence. As I'm just moving just like that, then this area is going to be responsible for hand movement, fine movement, for your facial muscle movement, and for your speaking. How do we know that? How do we know that it's responsible for walking? That's really simple. Scientists took two things, right? They took an electrical, catheter, and they stimulated this area. And once they stimulated this area, an individual start walking. So the scientists say that yes, this area is responsible for walking. Is it clear?
Yes, it
Hello?
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as he moves just like that, he just keep on electrically stimulating these areas, and he just draw this, scientists just draw this homunculus imaginary picture, which indicates that different, areas are responsible for what activity, right? Okay, like we will be discussing in a topic that is hydrocephalus, right? Hydrocephalus. So sometimes we have a type of hydrocephalus which we'll be discussing, which is going to lead to degeneration of this area. And as we have degeneration of this area, an individual won't walk. Am I right? He won't. He will be having urinary incontinence if this area is damaged. He will be having
No.
urinary incontinence, right? And
Normal
what else?
pressure.
As we are, yes, normal pressure hydrocephalus, the arachnoid granulations are going to be stuck here, right? We are going to discuss that in detail, right? Normal pressure, right? So we are going to be having urinary incontinence, and individual won't work. And as we are here having degeneration of this portion of your brain, so whenever the brain matter get degenerated, an individual is going to have dementia. Keep that in mind. He's going to start, he won't remember things. Okay. So we'll be discussing in details if the superficial cortex get, degenerated, it's dementia. If the deep one get damaged, it's going to be problems with movement, like basal ganglia we're going to discuss. So individual is going to be wakey, wobbly, and wet. What do we mean by wakey? He cannot walk. Okay, wakey, wet. Why? Because he's going to be having urinary incontinence, wakey, wobbly, and wet, right? So this is a mnemonic which we'll be discussing in detail, right? So what's the function of primary motor cortex? Now we know how to, how to know the function of primary motor cortex. So the scientists basically took an electrical catheter and they started stimulating different areas within the primary motor cortex, and they observed that primary motor, due to stimulation of different areas in the primary motor cortex, an individual started movement of different group of muscles, but those movements were unpurposeful movement. Like as they stimulate, a group of muscles were moved, but those movement weren't, like they didn't have any purpose. That was an unpurposeful movement, right? But as they started stimulating areas within the premotor cortex, so the scientists observed purposeful movement. What do we mean by purposeful movement? As they started, stimulating areas within the premotor cortex, so individual just wave his hand, hello, how are you? So it's a purposeful movement. And if I'm just moving a group of muscles, that's an unpurposeful movement, right? So primary motor cortex is responsible for unpurposeful movement only, movement of some group of muscles, while stimulation or the function of premotor cortex is to have some purposeful movement. Is it clear? And as the scientists keep on stimulating this supplementary motor cortex, so an individual just start jumping like a monkey, the primitive movement. It means that they assume that the supplementary motor cortex area is responsible for moving your axial muscles, right? The muscles of your shoulder, the muscle of your hip, muscles surrounding your vertebrae. So as we are moving that axial skeletal muscles, so we can move your hands like that. It's a primitive motion or primitive movement, done by monkeys. Okay. So these are basically the functions of different areas of primary motor cortex. But within the premotor cortex, scientists just found some other things as well, right? They found an area. Okay, I'm just zooming in this premotor cortex, which is responsible for purposeful movement, right? So once they stimulate an area, they just see movement of the hands, right? Okay. Another, once they stimulate another area, they basically show us a neck movements. And once they stimulated the third area, we were having eye movement. And as he stimulated this fourth area, we were having, the the phonation muscles making voices, muscles responsible for making voices. Phonation muscles start and the individual start speaking up, right? So this area which is responsible for phonation making words is basically called as Broca's area, right? Broca's area. It's going to be present at the dominant hemisphere. Most of individuals are, left dominant hemispheres, right? If you have right, an individual who writes with his right hand is going to be left dominant, right? So the Broca areas mostly is present in the left dominant hemisphere, in the premotor cortex, just inferiorly. Is it clear? And what is this Broca area responsible for? It's responsible
Speech.
for
Speech.
Speech.
speech,
For
for
speech.
phonation, making words. So whenever this Broca area damage, so how individual is going to be appearing? He can't speak fluently. He is going to be having broken words, but the words which he is delivering would make sense. They are going to be senseful words, but broken words. Okay, like let me just give you an example.
Be
Hey,
like
lo,
expressive appearance.
sir, mar, ge, red, how are you doing? Right? These are broken words, but my words make sense. Hello, Dr. Margaret. How are you doing? Right? So we'll be discussing another area. Whenever that's the word Nikki is damaged, we are going to be having, the speech is going to be fluent, but the words won't make sense. Okay, so the area in the premotor cortex, which were basically responsible for the eye movement, were basically called as frontal eye field. Frontal eye field. Keep that in mind. And individual just the scientists just saw that whenever we are stimulating the right-sided frontal eye field, like for example, this is our right-sided frontal eye field and left-sided frontal eye field, and these are your eyes, right? So whenever we were stimulating, okay, for example, if this is your right and this is your left. So whenever we were stimulating the right-sided frontal eye field, stimulating, the eyes were moving away from the right frontal eye field, right? So as we are stimulating the right-sided frontal eye field, the eyes would have a conjugate movement, opposite movement to the stimulation. And once we were stimulating the left-sided frontal eye field, the eyes were again looking in the opposite direction. But when the frontal eye field get damaged, stimulation and damage, that's really important. Then the eyes were looking towards the damage, right? That's really important, really, really important. Whenever we are stimulating the right-sided frontal eye field, individual is going to move, look opposite to that. Right-sided individual is going to move towards, look towards left side. But when the right-sided, okay, that was stimulation. But when the right-sided frontal eye field get lesion, get damaged, so the eyes are going to look towards the lesion, right? So Dr. Najib gave a really interesting example of that. If we have a child, and we are irritating a child, so the child is going to look away from me, that why are you irritating me? But if you just suddenly slap the child, so he's going to look towards you, that why are you slapping me, right? So as we are stimulating the eye field, stimulating the frontal eye field, individual is going to look, in opposite direction. But as we have lesion, as we have slapped that eye field, so individual is going to start looking towards the frontal eye field. Is it clear? So this frontal eye field basically lies within the premotor cortex. Is it clear? Hello?
Yes.
Just for prayer.
Okay, perfect, right? So we discussed Broca's area, we discussed frontal eye field. Now let's discuss corticospinal tract. We discussed that corticospinal tract basically comes from the cortex to the spinal cord. So which tract basically comes from the cortex to the spinal cord? The motor tract, right? The motor tract or the descending tracts. All of these tracts are they're same things, right? So remember, okay, so 30% of the fibers are going to come from your primary motor cortex. From the primary motor cortex, 30% of the fibers are going to come from premotor cortex plus supplementary motor cortex, and the remaining 40 are going to come from your somatosensory cortex. Really important, right? Okay, so we have different layers of, okay, so there are certain big cells which are present within the fifth layer of your brain, like, you can see the brain have basically, 6 layers, right? So in the fifth layer, we have a big cells which are known as cells of Betz, right? Cells of Betz. Some fibers from the cells of Betz are also going to be coming, right? And what's specific about cell of beds, these are really big cells, more than 8 times that of red blood cells. And these fibers are directly going to come, and they're directly going to they're directly going to synapse on the anterior horns of your spinal cord, which we'll be discussing, right? So let me just draw it, right? Your big brain. Okay, I'm just drawing a big structure here. Okay, so till now we discussed that 30% of the fibers are going to come from primary motor cortex, 30% are going to come from premotor cortex, and the remaining 40 are going to come from the somatosensory cortex. They will just start moving downward. Okay, and they're going to be get compacted because these big fibers once are moving through this small area in the internal capsule. Remember, internal capsule in the posterior limb of internal capsule. It's the same part where your sensory sensations were moving to the internal capsule, right? Okay, so they're going to move downward just like that. Okay, this is your midbrain, your pons, your medulla. Okay, and as they enter into the pons, in the pons they are going to synapse on certain nuclei within the pons, which are known as pontine nuclei, right? Pontine nuclei. They are really dispersed pontine nuclei. From there, some of the fibers are going to move into the cerebellum. So now, there I just told you in the cerebellum lecture that I'm going to mark this point. Why are these fibers coming and they're decussating on pontine nucleases? And why are we getting fibers into the cerebellum? That's really simple. Because in order to do a motor activity, a motor function, remember one thing, I have missed that. Once these fibers are moving down, they do not directly decide a motor activity, a motor function. Like for example, if an individual see a dog, right? So the sensations are going to be carried into some of the sensory cortex, and he's going to decide that run. Okay, individual is going to decide to run. But in order to run, it's really, kind of really fine movement. Running is really fine movement because during running, some group of muscles are going to be stimulated while the other are going to be inhibited on same time. Let me just give you another example. For example, now I'm writing, right? I'm writing, okay, we are doing neurology. So while I'm writing, I'm using flexors of my fingers, right? And at the same time, my extensor muscles of the fingers are inhibited, right? So for a fine movement, we need some group of muscles to be stimulated and the others to be inhibited at the same time. Is it clear? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Right? So in order to get some group of muscles stimulated and other inhibited, at the same time, basal ganglia is going to help us with that. So the information, first of all, going to enter into the basal ganglia. Basal ganglia is going to take information from the thalamus, because in order to know different positions or sensations of your body parts, it must communicate with the thalamus in order to know. Then it's going to send the response to the premotor cortex and tell the premotor cortex to generate a response, right? So the premotor cortex and all of these fibers are going to come down. They're going to synapse on the pontine nucleus, enter into the cerebellum. Why the fibers enter into the cerebellum? Because we know that the cerebellum already have the sense that where different body parts are lying. Where different body parts are lying. So in order to have a proper movement, for example, in this case, let me just give you an example. Okay, we were just discussing that someone saw a dog and he started running, right? So maybe this individual saw a dog and he was just sitting on a chair, right? So in order to run, first of all, he have to jump down of the chair and then start running, right? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay. Okay, we have two individuals. One of individual was sitting on the chair and the other was just standing on a road, right? Both of them saw a dog, right? And they are going to start running. So the first individual is going to jump off the chair and then start running, while the other individual is directly going to start running, right? So you can see that the motor activity in both of them is same, running, but the first one have to jump first, right? So that cerebellum is going to give you the sense that currently where do my different body parts are lying, what's the current status of my different muscles, right? So in order to know the current status of this different muscle, like in this case, individual was, sitting, he was just using his flexors, and in the other, he was just standing using his extensor. In both group of individual, we must be having a communication with the cerebellum in order to know the current status of different muscles, right? So once the cerebellum give the current status of different muscles, then we are going to fine tune our motor activity. Does that make sense or not? Hello?
So can you repeat that last part?
Okay. I'm doing a motor activity. What's my motor activity now? I'm just writing. I'm just delivering a lecture of neurology. I'm just writing. For the writing, I need I need finger muscles, right? The flexor to contract and start writing, but at the same time, I need the extensors to be inhibited. Am I right? It's a fine movement, right?
Yes.
It's a fine movement. It's a
Yes.
motor movement, right? So in order to have fine movement, can I say that I have to stimulate some group of muscles at the same time I have to inhibit the opposite group of muscles?
Yes.
So same stimulation and inhibition at the same time, it's a function of basal ganglia, which we'll be discussing in detail, the direct pathway and indirect pathway, right? So direct pathway leads to
Yes, sir.
stimulation, indirect pathway leads to inhibition. That's simple. We're going to discuss it in basal ganglia, right? Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. So for example, if I am writing, so let's consider two individuals giving a lecture just like me. One individual have his pencil on the table and the other have the pencil in his hand, right? And you just ask him that please explain it again. So the first tutor is first of all going to grab the pencil from the table and then start writing, while the other is directly going to start writing, right? So the position of the muscles in both of these individuals are different, and only cerebellum know. Cerebellum know, right? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Cerebellum know. So that's why in order to have a fine movement by your motor tract, we must be having a good friendship with the cerebellum so that they can give me information of the current status of your muscles, right? Where are they? And according to that, I can find my activity, motor activity. Does that make sense or not? Hello?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so then the fibers are going to come down, and as they come down, so in the lower medulla, 90% of the fibers will decassate. 90% of the fibers will decassate, while the 10% of fibers will directly come down. Okay, and as these 90% fiber decassate, they're going to move down and they're going to synapse on the neurons in the anterior horn. Anterior horn, because we discussed anterior horn have the neurons of your motor.
Motor
They're going to,
reflex.
yes, the motor neuron, the nuclei of the cell bodies of your motor neuron, right? Okay, and these 90% of fibers, they're going. Okay, for example, if this is your anterior horn, so okay, what I did with this horn. Okay, for example, if this is your spinal cord, anterior horn, right? So these fibers are going to decassate here in the anterior horn. These 94%, right? While the remaining 10% are going to come down and they're going to decassate at the level of the spinal cord. Is it clear? 10% are going to decassate at the level of spinal cord. So these 90% of fibers which decassated in the lower medulla are responsible for fine motor movement. Fine motor movements, right? While these 10% of fibers which are decassating at the level of your spinal cord are responsible for the primitive movements. What do I mean by primitive movement? Axial, skeletal, muscle movement. So can I say that these 10% of fibers are basically coming from the supplementary motor cortex? Because supplementary motor cortex was responsible for which movements? It was basically responsible for your primitive movement, that is axial skeletal muscle movement just like a monkey jumping here and there. Is it clear? Yes or no?
Justin, Maggie speaking.
Yes.
Okay, let me just give you an entire overview of this descending pathway. Just please fix your mics, please. Hello. Are you guys with me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So let me just give you an entire overview of this topic again. Okay, we have our brain, we have a central sulcus. In front of central sulcus, we have motor area. Behind the central sulcus, we have somatosensory area. In front of the central sulcus, we have three further areas which comes in the motor cortex: primary motor cortex, premotor cortex, supplementary motor cortex. Stimulation of primary motor cortex is going to give me some unpurposeful movement. They do not have any purpose. Supplementary motor cortex is going to give me movement of my axial skeletal muscles, which are going to be just like movement of a monkey axial. Okay. Then we have premotor cortex. If we stimulate the premotor cortex, it's going to be giving me movement that's going to be purposeful. Further, it consists of muscles of your neck and two important other: frontal eye field and Broca's area. Frontal eye field, you have right frontal eye field, you have left frontal eye field. If I'm just looking straight, it means both of my central eye fields are stimulated at the same time. That's why I'm just looking straight. If I want to look towards the right, it means the left-sided central eye field is going to be stimulated. If I'm looking towards the left, it means that the right-sided frontal eye field is going to be stimulated, right? If we have lesion of those central eye field, eyes are going to look towards the lesion. Lesion of the right-sided frontal eye fields, eyes are going to be looking towards the right. Does it make sense? Hello.
Yes.
Then we have our Broca's area responsible for phonation, making voices. If it's damaged, broken words. Hello guys, how are you doing? Since the words would make again the words would make sense, but it's going to be broken words, right? We have our homunculus. That's an imaginary picture drawn on our brain, which basically shows different areas of brain responsible for different activities. 30% from primary motor cortex, 30% from premotor cortex, 40%. Moving down, if you are doing a fine activities, basal ganglia is going to help that, because for the fine activities we need some group of muscles to be stimulated at the same time and the other group to be inhibited at the same time. Moving down into the pons, disperse on the pontine nucleus, entering into the cerebellum in order to gather information from there. Then moving down, 90% of them get decassedated at the lower medulla. They just move and they synapse on the anterior horn of your spinal cord. And the remaining 10% would just go down and they would decassette at the level of the anterior horn. Is it clear? Let's just have an overview from first aid. Let's see what first aid. Okay, who is going to be telling me the page number for these tracks in first aid? Hello.
Yes.
Page number for the tracks. I think this is the one, right? Hello. Okay, so let's discuss it from first aid. We have dorsal column. Okay, sorry. It's responsible for the modern sensation, pressure, vibration, fine touch, proprioception. Okay, I'm going to read the first aid, and wherever you have problem, you are going to be telling this. Imagine what I just told you, right? Pressure, vibration, fine touch, proprioception, modern sensation. Sensory nerve endings of the unipolar neurons in the dorsal root ganglion enter the spinal cord, ascend ipsilaterally in the dorsal column. Ipsilaterally, right? The fasciculus, gracilis, and cuneatus, right? Okay. First order neuron is going to synapse by nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, and they're going to start decasseting them, right? Okay. They're going to move upward, the second order neuron, moving into the VPL, getting into somatosensory cortex. Is it clear? Yes or no? Okay. Okay. Then we have
Yes.
spinothalamic pathway, pain temperature. Fibers, A delta fibers. Again, pseudo unipolar neurons. You are going to do that. What is pseudo unipolar neuron? Posterior horn, decassette in the spinal anterior commissure, ascend contralaterally 1 to 2 segment above, which they haven't mentioned, right? Decassette in the spinal cord as anterior white commissure. Remember, syringomyelia entering into anterior commissure, loss of pain temperature, right? Moving again into VPL, direct into primary somatosensory cortex, right? Corticospinal tracts. Motor cortex descending ipsilaterally through posterior limb, often decassette in caudal medulla, descend contralaterally, 90% of the fibers get into the anterior horn, right? The lower motor neuron, neuromuscular junction. So that was all about your tracts. Let's discuss our next topic, which we did, okay, about the homunculus and okay. So we discussed this as well, right? So you can see we have the central sulcus, primary motor cortex, premotor cortex, supplementary motor cortex. Broca's areas, you guys know, right? Frontal eye field, you guys know the details, and we have somatosensory cortex, right? We have Salvian fissure, temporal lobe, which we'll be discussing in our next module, right? This is the human homunculus which I was just talking about. It's basically an imaginary picture going from the medial portion of your cerebrum, going just like that, and it's an imaginary picture which basically show the activity of different parts of your brain. And that was all about today's lecture. You know, the tracks is the most confusing of of the neuro. If you guys know the tracks, you guys are done with your, right? So we did the hardest part, and congratulations. Hope so you guys enjoyed the session, and let's meet tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Marian. Marian.